Welcome everyone to another installment of Rep TV. We are pleased to have with us today Dr. Baseball, Wayne McDonald, Academic Chair and Clinical Associate Professor at NYU School of Professional Studies. Wayne was here with us for the first segment, talking a little bit about steroid use, Lenny Dykstra, some of the implications on Hall of Fame inductees for the future. We wanted to now shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the scope of the game of baseball and its reputation internationally. So one of the things I wanted to start off with, Wayne, baseball had its all-star game down in San Diego. Commissioner Manfred went down to Tijuana. And as part of their initiative, the All-Star Legacy Project, they opened up the field down there, doing great things. And one of the things that he mentioned is that he sees it's a viable long-term option to have a baseball team down in Mexico, perhaps in Tijuana. We've heard, I think, other cities before, Monterrey, San Juan, Puerto Rico, but he specifically mentioned Tijuana this time. What does long-term mean? Do you think that baseball does have a future down there?
I think they're very interested in building some ties in Mexico right now, but I think the big thing we have to look at is two key examples, Oakland and Tampa Bay. They're having economic problems in their markets for facilities.
Yes.
I think we know in professional sports across the board right now, you need a state-of-the-art modern facility, probably in the neighborhood of $750 million to $1 billion in construction, but then you need at least at a minimum 85% max capacity in that facility night in and night out. So I think it's more of an economic concern right now whether or not certain cities within Mexico can afford it and really support it, but there is purely a genuine interest not only in Mexico but in Cuba.
That's what I was going to ask about Havana.
Yeah.
I mean, they live, eat, and breathe baseball. Castro might have gone to the majors, right? So, and they've got the fan base right there. So, I would guess Havana before Mexico.
The only thing that in the conversations that I've had with Major League Baseball with regard to that topic and people who work within the organization, Havana is still stuck in the 1950s. And there's all the different embargoes and the things that still have to go through. Economically, it's not a viable option right now. I've heard many problems from that Cuba game when Major League Baseball went down and played, but it was more of they don't have the proper infrastructure for facilities. They don't even sell F&B at games. So it's a lot of that stuff that we would think is commonplace here. Without question, there is sincere interest in both countries to expand the game, but right now there's economic challenges because they don't know how sustainable those models could be. You know, I think Montreal probably has a better shot right now than anything in Mexico at the present moment.
But why go back to Montreal when it failed the first time?
You're right, very good point, but I'm just looking at it from the economic perspective and about the structure. But I think if let's look at it even from the perspective of where are all the players coming from. They come from Latin American countries right now, and that's where the infusion of excitement and enthusiasm is coming from. So why not capitalize on it? But capitalize on it in a way that makes economic sense. Maybe not today, but hopefully in the years to come to make sure that relationship works.
It's going to be one rough road trip.
San Diego and Tijuana.
Well, yeah. I'm just thinking like Caracas, Buenos Aires.
Well, the road trip would be rougher if a certain presidential candidate gets elected and there's a wall built in between.
Right.
And that's actually a question I wanted to ask you, Wayne. Political ramifications. I mean, if there's a Donald Trump elected president, would that mean that it would be more difficult to make that long-term viable option actually come to fruition?
Well, we saw what happened in Arizona with the All-Star game a number of years ago. We've seen what's happening in North Carolina right now, where the NBA All-Star game got taken away. And you know, to me, it's a wait-and-see approach because sometimes I just wonder: is this grandstanding to say things outrageous to, you know, elicit more feedback, both positive and really negative in a lot of ways? Because, you know, you're supposed to be breaking down walls, not building them in a lot of ways, and particularly if I look at it from Major League Baseball's perspective, you want those walls down because these are millions of people who want your sport, crave your sport, and if the sport's allowed to build a proper infrastructure, the return on investment can be tenfold in so many different ways, not just from a monetary, a financial perspective, but from a human perspective as well.
Speaking of everyone's favorite presidential candidate, so he's already concerned that 2 of the 3 debates would conflict with NFL games. He's not at all mentioned the playoffs, the World Series. Does that indicate that football still, I hate to use the word trumps baseball as like the national viewing sport?
I think it does right now, but talk to me in 10 years when this concussion thing really, I mean, the ignorance with the issue is horrifying. We saw what happened with Commissioner Bettman last week. We saw what the New York Times reported last week with the Play 60 initiative and the safety. We're only at about a 10th of where we're going to go with all this concussion stuff. And I think you have Commissioner Manfred, who's sitting behind Major League Baseball, realizing there's going to be a whole new audience of fans to attract. The game has to get younger, has to get quicker, and it has to get smarter. And I think under his leadership, it will. And talk to me in about a decade to see who's playing what. Are we seeing more in baseball? Are we seeing more in football? And then let's see more class action lawsuits that are going to pop up with football because of the concussions.
And on that subject, I think because of the concussions, we are going to see more gifted black athletes going into baseball because their parents will not let them pursue a football career.
We're seeing it right now. If you look at the last few draft classes in Major League Baseball, what Major League Baseball has done with the reviving baseball in the inner cities, the urban youth academies, we're already seeing that happening right now because the scholarships that baseball players going to college, it doesn't matter what ethnic group you're from, it's very challenging compared to, say, football and basketball, among other sports. What baseball is doing with reviving baseball in the inner cities and the Urban Youth Academy, we're already seeing the positive results of it, and it's just going to grow with the problems that we're seeing with the NFL and football in general.
So, 25 years from now, will baseball regain its status as the national pastime?
I think baseball will always be the country's national pastime, but football's America's game. And I think that's the big distinction because I consider the game of baseball like an old pair of socks that you keep around that you know is comfortable, that you can always go back to.
Kind of a nasty analogy.
But something comfort, or a blanket or a sweat.
Thank you. It's a little bit more appropriate.
That you go back to, that you know that there's a level of comfort.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Where, football for, I would say, since the Sports Broadcasting Act of the early 60s, where they capitalized on television, it's really taken a lot of thunder from baseball.
Now, internationally, are we going to see the game become more popular? Now, it's not in the Olympics, which are coming up next month, or this month in Rio. It's not going to be there. But they're perhaps looking at for 2020 in Tokyo. Will baseball be in the Olympics in 2020? Should it be in the Olympics there? Because I know there's conflicts with the WBC as well. And what are the ramifications of finally getting back into the Olympic Games?
I think with the way baseball has structured the World Baseball Classic and the success that we've seen with it, I think the timing is always questionable having it during spring training, but there's no such thing as a perfect time frame. I think baseball is saying, well, if the Olympics doesn't want us, we'll go out ahead and do our own thing. From a nationalism perspective, you always want to see baseball in the Olympics. You want.
Wayne, why has basketball become a universal and baseball hasn't?
Well, I guess because of the accessibility to a lot of the players. It's very easy to root for LeBron James from all corners of the world. I also think the speed of the game of basketball, the tempo, it's easier to market basketball players than it is in some cases baseball players. Major League Baseball is doing a better job of it. So I think that's where the appeal has been. And also, let's call it like we see it, probably the best national basketball team is the U.S. women's national.
Oh, no question.
We're talking about, I think, 5 consecutive gold medals or something that they're going for, where the men's just have 2 consecutive. And I think that's going to be one of the great stories of this upcoming Olympics. Can they continue their dominance? And it's an unsung.
Well, that and the Zika virus and how many athletes fall prey to it.
Well, it's funny. You read that day in and day out. You pick up the Times. I got colleagues who are covering it extensively, and they're saying 3 teaspoons of water is like your limit. Now go tell that to an Olympic swimmer.
Oh, yeah, really.
A little bit of a problem there.
So I think we're coming up on our time, but do you want to do predictions, Steve?
Absolutely. This man, for all the, how many years have we been doing this?
Quite a while.
Dead wrong, like every single, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. So, all right, so we've just entered early August. We've seen a lot of trades going on, a lot of jockeying. The two best teams in baseball right now, the Cubbies and what, the Indians maybe?
Rangers.
Maybe the Rangers.
Rangers.
Indians, the Rangers.
Okay, so let's start with the Mets and the Yankees. Will either one make it as a wild card?
The Mets will, the Yankees won't.
Okay, so all right, so let's advance past that. Is there a Cinderella team that will advance through the wild card, and supplant Texas, Cleveland, or Chicago and be in the World Series?
I think you have a dark horse team, the Miami Marlins.
Yeah, they're tough.
I think they're starting to realize how good they are. And Paul and I were talking before about the Barry Bonds and Don Mattingly effect is starting to really work into the team where they're starting to listen to these great players.
Mm-hmm.
I still think that the Cubs are by far the best team in the National League. I think this is destiny this year for them to get to the
Despite the fact that they've had so many great teams and they always manage to choke.
I think the difference here is Madden. I really do. I've always said this. If I were to start a franchise today, I want Clayton Kershaw as my pitcher, and I want Joe Madden as my manager.
Yeah.
I think he's an enlightened leader. He knows how to get the most out of all of his players, but also knows how to keep it light.
Yeah.
And I think in those pressure
Sounds like me.
Oh. Well, I think if we're looking at managerial strategy, to see a Joe Madden versus Frank.
This is my A-Rod, by the way.
Want to check my back, correct?
Yeah, you mind taking your shirt off?
If we see a Joe Madden versus Terry Francona World Series, Cleveland versus Chicago, I think as far as strategy goes, that would be like a dream. Or do you see that as a viability?
It's close. I think the Rangers with picking up Lucroy and Beltran and the way
that was amazing.
they're under the radar. A really good team under the radar. I think everyone's darling pick is the Indians right now.
Yeah.
I think they're really good. I think Frank Cohen's an outstanding manager. But I have Cubs and Rangers in the World Series.
And the world champion will be?
Cubs.
Cubs.
All right. We're having him back,
Back in November, right.
depending on rain delays, right around Game 3, Game 4 of the series. Deal?
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Always a
Really
pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
You've got to sign off.
Signing off, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining Rep TV, and hope you join us next time.